Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 65 of the Feeling Good podcast. And today we're starting on a new series on the 5 secrets of effective communication. We talked about that in 2 episodes, way back when, episodes 14 and 15. But it was kind of an overview, and we didn't give a lot of examples of how to use them. So I think we're going to go a little bit more in depth for a series of 5. We'll do 5 or so.
Yeah.
We may do more, but
right.
This is a topic that is apparently easy, but isn't. And so it looks easy on the surface, but when people practice it, they find out that it's not so easy. So today we'll give a little bit of an overview, and we'll do the first of the 5 secrets, which is the disarming technique, right, David?
Absolutely, and we have a special guest today.
Yes.
It's going to add tremendous excitement and warmth and depth to our broadcast.
Yes. In fact, why don't we introduce our guest here for her debut on the Feeling Good podcast. This is Helen Yeni-Komshian. Hi, Helen.
Hello.
You can get closer.
Okay. Hello. Glad to be here.
So, Helen, so that our listeners get to know you a little bit, can you tell us how you're connected to David's work and how you use it, how you practice it, and what you do?
Sure.
And your background.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a psychiatrist. I have a private practice in Palo Alto. I did my residency training at Stanford between 2001 and 2004, and that's when I met David. David,
like 2002, do you think?
I think I met you 2001.
Oh, 2001, yeah.
So
because you just transferred in.
That's right. I did an internship in internal medicine and then came as a second-year resident to do psychiatry at Stanford.
And we were meeting in room 2213. You remember?
That I don't remember the room number, but I definitely remember meeting with you. And at that time, it was a very small group with just residents.
Oh.
And I think at the same time you were doing some inpatient groups, or perhaps before. But you were teaching residents team therapy, and from my first exposure to team therapy and to David especially, I just was hooked because I found that team therapy offered a very powerful framework to do great psychotherapy. And as a resident learning psychotherapy, a lot of the time I felt like, well, what's actually happening here? What are we doing? What am I supposed to say? And I learned so much and continue to learn so much from David and our group, and just love that I have this way of working with people that can be very helpful in a short period of time. And one of the neat things over the years is that team therapy has evolved. So I think all the agenda setting things are...
Oh, yeah. That's one thing I love about it. It seems to evolve every week, either a new twist on the teaching or a new technique or a new theoretical angle, like when I was down in San Diego teaching with Jill at the ABCT conference, and I was teaching a group the externalization of voices and having them practice it and the acceptance paradox. And then one of the participants, and that's not the topic of this broadcast, but just taking off what you said there, raised the question, when should we use the acceptance paradox and when should we use the self-defense paradigm? I said, well, that's something that came up about 10 years ago, and we were going to do a lot of development of it, and we kind of let it drop. So that's something new for us to think about. But the acceptance paradox is more powerful for low self-esteem type problems. The self-defense paradigm is more effective for relapse prevention training, where patients are going to have the thoughts when they relapse, so that the therapy was a fraud, and I'm a loser after all, and it didn't work. There you want to blast those thoughts out of the water, but when you have thoughts, I'm not good enough, and self-critical thoughts, often the acceptance paradox is vastly, vastly superior. But there's a great deal more we could do, I think, to address that question, because it's really, these are the two great dimensions of psychotherapy, and some movements like ACT are all into acceptance and treat everything with acceptance, as if that's going to be the solution for everyone. And then others are more into arguing and self-defense, but sometimes, one works, sometimes the other works, sometimes a combo.
Right.
So
that's,
Back to Helen, I wanted to also know how how does team therapy enter into your practice?
Well, for the most part, I do team therapy exclusively in my practice. I do some medication evaluation and management for people, and also sometimes supportive therapy, not using the team framework. But for the most part, I do team therapy with my patients, and so that involves all those steps: testing, empathy, agenda setting methods.
And you're a very advanced practitioner of team CBT. I want to add this, and are you accepting patients?
At the moment, yes.
So we'll have to put some information on the show notes if people want to get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And one other thing is that Helen started as a student in the Tuesday group, but now co-teaches the group with Jill and me, and in workshops around the country. When I'm teaching the 5 secrets, which is what we're going to start teaching our folks today, I often say that the 5 secrets of effective communication are like 5 notes of a musical instrument. And to get good at it, you have to practice and work at it. And that we still practice it often in the Tuesday group. And I say we have this one member, Helen Yeni-Komshian, who's been coming probably 15 years now, and so she still learns new things every time we practice with this approach. This is really a very rich matrix, or a very rich resource for therapists who want to improve your connection with your patients, your empathy, as well as for people in the general public who are wanting to develop greater intimacy, greater friendship, better connections with colleagues, loved ones, family members, friends, neighbors, virtually anyone.
Right, and that brings up, you already answered the question I was going to ask you, which is why do we need to use the 5 secrets? And you're talking about building connection. Now, this may sound like a weird question, but why would we want to build connection?
Well, there's a fantastic answer to that, which Helen will now give.
Okay.
Adding a new dynamic to our podcast.
Well, we could start by saying we don't always want to build connection. So sometimes when we're in conflict with someone, we want to get away from them as fast as possible or minimize our contact with them. So it's not a given that you always want to use 5 secrets, or that you always should use 5 secrets. But many times we do want to build connection. Let's say there's a conflict with somebody who's very important to us, like a family member or a good friend, and there's been some kind of rupture, or even they're in pain, or something's going on, and you want to be a good listener and a good friend or a good family member. And in the case of a conflict, you want to ease the conflict rather than increase the conflict. And in that case, the 5 secrets provides you a very reliable framework to get closer to someone, to make them feel heard and understood, and to open the lines of communication.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's easier said than done, and what we'll be teaching, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a therapist and you'd like to develop way better empathy skills with your patients, it's going to require a lot of work to learn how to do this. The payoff is tremendous, and we'll make it look easy, but it really is not easy. And the same thing, if you're on my Sunday hike yesterday, a fellow came on the hike, and his issue was a conflict with his girlfriend. Just keep it on a general level, but she's often quite critical of him and implying that he's not caring enough and that he kind of takes her for granted, this type of thing. And he always responds defensively, and the problem escalates. And this is a fellow with a very high IQ, tremendous motivation, but he really struggled for 2.5 hours trying to learn how to respond in a less defensive way when we were role-playing. Here's what the girlfriend says, and how would you respond? And over and over and over again, he kept making the same kinds of mistakes. I think human nature, that we're programmed to respond to people defensively, and to learn to stop doing that is not easy. And he's a professional guitar player, and he's been coming on hikes for a year. I love the guy, and we just have a tremendous time, and he's really a contributor. But he was just struggling, and I said, well, how much homework have you been doing on your interaction with your girlfriend? How many relationship journals have you filled out, and to try to pinpoint the errors you're making and to practice responding more effectively? And of course I knew the answer was 0. And then I said to him, now suppose you were talking to me about playing the guitar on this hike and to kind of teach me the basics of guitar playing, and then I go on after the hike and pick up a guitar and try to play. How would it sound? And he said, well, you couldn't do it. It wouldn't sound. You'd sound crappy. I said, well, it's the same way. We can teach you these things, but on the hike and practice. But if you really want to master them, you're going to have to put in the time and do the homework. And one thing listeners can do is pick up my book, Feeling Good Together, and read it and do the written exercises. And then we're also going to give you homework assignments to practice one of the 5 secrets over and over again for a week between podcasts.
One thing that I often tell my clients is that there are certain things that are not part of the 5 secrets, like defending. That's number 1.
Yeah.
But also attacking.
Right.
Justifying.
Yeah.
Trying to fix it.
Advice giving.
Blaming.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are not part of it.
Arguing. Right.
And those are the things that we tend to do.
Right. Exactly.
The fixing it is one that I see happen quite often, where somebody gets upset and we try to fix their problem so that they don't get upset.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, trying to help people.
Right.
It's a huge mistake.
And I see that a lot, actually, in parenting, in a way. I have two children, and they're school age now, but back when they were younger and we spent a lot of time on playgrounds, you'd see kids fall down and get hurt, and parents would swoop in and say, you're okay, which is trying to be helpful.
Yeah, right.
But actually is not very effective from a 5 secrets kind of standpoint. And you could see the kids actually not calming down with the parents insisting you're okay, because it's kind of invalidating.
Yeah.
You see
I'm not okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
And you see the same error when there's a family member who's depressed, and the spouse or a parent responds trying to help that family member rather than listening and using the 5 secrets and empathizing. And once again, that urge to help someone who's depressed and feeling worthless and inadequate, try to cheer them up or to say something positive or give them some kind of advice, not only virtually never works, but it practically always makes the individual feel worse. And those attempts are not at all effective. And so one of the goals that we would have for those of you who have friends or family members who are struggling in one way or another is to begin to learn learn empathy, learn the 5 secrets of effective communication.
By the way, you keep calling this the 5 secrets. We're going to have thousands of people listening to this. How is this going to be a secret anymore?
Well, it's a secret because we're not going to tell them what any of the secrets are. We're just going to tease them that we have these 5 secrets. Now, we'll tell you what they are. One other quick thing for therapists who are listening is that you probably think your empathy skills are pretty good. And you're quite wrong. Your empathy skills suck, but you don't know it. And I have developed a very sensitive empathy scale. Oh gosh, we just lost half our listeners.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's just a fact. And I've developed a really sensitive empathy scale, which we require patients to take after every session. And when clinicians use it for the first time with patients, they find they have at least 50% of their patients. Your patients will fail you at every session. And most clinicians report that they get failing grade from every patient at every session. And so that's something you might want to do because the techniques we're going to be teaching you in these podcasts will allow you to dramatically improve and quickly improve your therapy skills. And that's why I developed the 5 secrets in the first place, because I sensed that while I was a great technician, I lacked a certain warmth, a certain interpersonal skill that some of my students seemed to have when they would sit in with me as co-therapists. And I said, I want that for myself. And I worked really hard to develop and learn these methods. I really put my heart and soul into it, and that's what you listeners are going to have to do if you like what you hear, and if there's someone in your life, maybe patients you're not connecting with as well as you want, or loved ones you've been at odds with, and you'd like to turn that around. These are some powerful tools.
Yeah. So I think we may be ready to start diving into the first one for today, which is the disarming technique. Is that right?
Yeah, let's go over the 5 the secrets and briefly define them.
Okay, yeah, let's say what they are.
Yeah, there's 3 listening skills. In fact, I think of the 5 secrets under the acronym EAR, and we'll post this handout that you have here, brought here, Helen. But why don't you tell us, there's EAR, there's 3 empathy skills. E is empathy, there's 1 assertiveness skill, and R is respect. EAR, empathy, assertiveness, and respect. And tell us about what's the disarming technique, the first of the empathy skills.
The disarming technique is finding truth in what the other person is saying, even if it seems totally unreasonable or unfair.
And that's right. And this is the most important of the 5 secrets by far and the toughest to learn. And it's based on what I call the law of opposites. And the law of opposites states that if someone attacks you with an unfair, irrational criticism, and by the way, almost everyone in the United States, as well as our listeners worldwide, in Mumbai, or Myanmar, or South Africa, Ethiopia.
Listeners in all these areas?
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
People are listening all over the world now.
Fantastic.
And what we do is we defend ourselves, and it's a knee-jerk reaction because we hear the other person's criticism as being unfair or illogical or exaggerated. And the law of opposites says if you give in to that urge, and you all do, by the way, to defend yourself, you will prove that the criticism is actually valid.
You're wrong, David. I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Not me.
Yeah.
So that's a paradox. And then the other side of the paradox is if you genuinely agree with a criticism that's totally preposterous and unfair and irrational, but you immediately and genuinely agree that it's totally correct, the moment you do that, the other person will instantly stop believing the criticism. And that's another paradox.
Yeah, and I want to add that you can't lie. So,
No.
But you can find truth in what the other person is saying. So
There's always
there's
truth.
always truth, and even if you see a situation differently, you can disarm how the other person is viewing the situation.
Not only how they're viewing it,
Yeah.
but to find the actual, real,
Right.
ultimate truth in what they're saying. And first you'll find a grain of truth, and then you'll find a Mount Everest of truth. And we'll give examples of that in a minute, but we'll give the overview first.
Can I add just one
Yeah.
thing to the overview, is that there are many other frameworks of communication, and I think that listeners familiar with other frameworks
Yeah,
of
like nonviolent
communication skills.
communication or
Yeah.
active listening or
Right. They'll-
Rogerian therapy.
Yeah, they'll find a lot of overlap with
Yeah.
5 Secrets. And one of the things I like about 5 Secrets is that it's a really nice package and it's easy to remember.
Right. So that's the disarming technique, and we'll focus on that one today. But what's this next thing here, Helen? Thought and feeling empathy. What's that all about?
Yeah, so thought empathy is pretty simple. It's paraphrasing the other person's words. And maybe it's actually simple in theory, but sometimes difficult in practice. And I find this one really useful if somebody is making some points about something. Like, let's say somebody's telling you to do something, or they're complaining about items A, B, and C, and if you go back and you mention items A, B, and C specifically using their words, they really feel heard and understood. You're not just
Absolutely.
nodding and saying, yeah. You're using thought empathy to reflect that back to them.
An image I once heard, it's as if somebody, when they're talking to you or if they're criticizing you or whatever, they're ranting about world affairs or whatever, they're like kind of sending you a letter. And so you open the letter and read it out loud. That way
Yes.
they see that you got the message. And this turns out to be extremely difficult for people, especially therapists, who think they learned to do this in graduate school. But it's, as you say, it's much harder than it thinks. Than you think. And there's a solution that we'll talk about how to guarantee you'll have excellent thought empathy. But you should not think this is easy. And one reason is because if somebody is criticizing you, you'll start to get so spaced out trying to think how to defend yourself or what to say next, that by the time they're through, you won't even remember 2/3 of what they told you. And I do demonstrations on this in workshops for therapists all over the U.S. and Canada. And demonstrations, someone will just give 3 critical statements toward the one playing the role of the therapist. And then you stop and say, do you have any idea what
did they just say?
And they have no idea. They're just going to give the response they've been working out. And when you give in to that, it ticks the other person off because they feel like you haven't heard, and you haven't heard. But so that's thought empathy. But Helen, what's feeling empathy?
Feeling empathy is acknowledging how the other person is probably feeling based on what he or she said. And sometimes you know for sure how they're feeling because they'll tell you, I'm so mad at you, or I feel really sad right now, or I'm so hurt or hopeless or whatever. And other times they may not tell you, but you may be able to guess. And if you're not sure, you can say things like, I wonder if you're feeling angry at me right now, or I could imagine that you're feeling hurt and disappointed. So, but the point is to acknowledge their feelings.
Right, and this book, women are from Venus, men are from Mars.
I think it's the opposite.
Or men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or something.
Yes.
Therapists are from Pluto, whatever. And it gives the implication that men cannot deal with feelings and emotion words, and that women can. But that's not a valid concept, because both men and women have tremendous difficulties learning feeling empathy, learning to acknowledge how another person's feeling. And we'll go into that in probably in our next podcast and give you exercises to practice this between sessions. But it's extraordinarily important and almost unbelievably difficult for people to learn to do this simple thought and feeling empathy. So, and what's inquiry, Helen?
Inquiry is asking questions to learn more about what the other person is thinking and feeling. And it's not asking them to defend their point of view. So it's not asking something like, how could you say that
I'm a loser.
I disappointed you, or how could
you say I don't care about you?
Yeah, how could you say I don't care about you? So that's not the spirit of inquiry, right? That's an attack. It
sounds like a question, but it's not.
No, and it's asking the other person to provide evidence for something. So the spirit of inquiry is really just to tell me more. I really want to understand your point of view. Can you tell me more what you're thinking and feeling? So you're saying
that I hurt your feelings last session. Can you tell me more about that? And that must have felt pretty awful. Tell me how you were feeling. Tell me some of the things I've said or done that have hurt your feelings and that have kind of turned you off. That would be inquiry. Another huge inquiry error that therapists make is when the patient criticizes the therapist says, well, tell me how I can do better.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that a huge mistake?
It's, again, sort of, it's demanding that the patient then fix your problem. So it is not asking for the person to open up in a way that they're sharing their thoughts and feelings. It's asking for a specific fix.
Yes, and that same error happens in intimate relationships with family members. Someone criticizes you, or they're upset about something, and you say, well, let's see if we can solve this problem, or how could I do better, or something like that, rather than giving the person the space to open up and share their feelings of depression and worthlessness and despair and anger and whatever it is. So those are the 3 listening skills, and we're just...
And by the way, I want to point out that we're listing those 5 secrets in a particular order, but that's not how they are used.
That's right.
You do like you said, those are the 5 notes of an instrument, and you play them in the right chord.
And even that question that you just asked, how can I fix it? That might come later. That might be a question that you could discuss with someone after the emotional repair has been made.
Right.
But the idea about inquiry when you're thinking about 5 secrets is to get closer to someone, and it's really about the connection more than specific problem solving right in that moment.
I love what you're saying, and now that's empathy, the disarming technique, thought and feeling, empathy, and inquiry. That's the E of EAR. Now, the A is assertiveness, and the specific technique we'll be teaching you is called I feel statements. Now, what's an I feel statement, Helen?
An I feel statement is when you express your own ideas and feelings in a direct and tactful manner. So you use an I feel statement like, I feel upset.
Would this be a good one? Like, I feel like you're wrong. Would that be a good I feel statement?
No, that is not. That's a thought masked in an I feel statement.
It's a criticism.
Yeah, it's a criticism. Right. So you think about I feel then being followed by an emotion. And this is really hard for people to do. It's very hard for therapists to do because we think that we shouldn't be putting our feelings in the room, and it can feel very vulnerable to state what your feelings are, and you can also be afraid to state your feelings because of what effect it might have on the other person.
Yeah.
And be rejected also.
Right.
Yeah. That's so true what you're saying, and we'll post the emotions list. So the formula here, I don't like formulas, but it's I feel A, B, and C, and A, B, and C would be words from the list of feeling words or emotion words.
And I have to say that the English language is not the most complete when it comes to emotions. So, people can get more creative with that.
Is French better?
No, French is just as bad, but we have different sets. So if you can speak both languages, why not?
Okay.
But I think what you said is vitally important. We'll come back to this when we have our week on I feel statements, but we have tremendous inhibitions on sharing our feelings. I know I get feedback all the time, and we should start getting feedback on our podcasts, figure out some way to do that so people can rate each podcast.
There's a good idea because we need to, practice what we preach.
Yeah.
Including in the podcast, even though this is not therapy.
Well, we can probably figure a way to do that. But at any rate, in my teaching and my workshops, I get feedback and invite people to be critical and say what they really feel. And most of the time I get wonderful feedback, amazing feedback, which touches me. But also fairly often there will be someone who's ticked off and gives a very brutal criticism, and then I have a tendency to feel ashamed. Mm-hmm. And then I think, oh, I must hide this feeling because a teacher, a Stanford adjunct professor, is not supposed to feel ashamed, or this is an inappropriate emotion or something. And that's the kind of thing we do. We try to hide our feelings all the time. And most people go around in life, like being fake. Mm-hmm. and not wanting people to see what's going on inside. So like all of the 5 secrets, it's easy to model it and to explain it, but it's very, very difficult for people to do this in reality. Again, because like all of these techniques, it really kind of requires the death of the ego. Learning to do this is not just a psychological thing, but a spiritual thing. And I'm not talking about this or that religion, but it requires something very deep inside of us has to surrender and change to be able to use these techniques. What's this last one here? R equals respect, and then this called stroking. What's that, Helen?
So stroking refers to conveying an attitude of respect, even if you feel frustrated or angry with the other person.
That's right. And again, this is almost impossibly difficult for humans to do because it means not attacking the other person, not defending yourself, but rather to convey warmth and respect even in the heat of battle. And when you're using the 5 secrets, you're allowed to be real angry with the other person and to share that. And they're allowed to be angry with you, and you can ask them about that and encourage them to express those feelings. But you can do that in a warm way, or you can do that in a hostile way. Mm-hmm. You can share your anger, which only 3 humans on the surface of the earth at this time are willing to do. Or you can attack with your anger, which all the rest of human beings want to do, to be mean, to hurt someone, to get revenge, to get back at someone, to lash out. And the stroking means to convey warmth and respect. And it goes back to the Martin Buber, I think we've mentioned him on an earlier podcast, but the Jewish theologian, I believe he was Jewish, in the early 20th century, talked about the difference between an I-thou relationship and an I-it relationship. And it means to convey warmth, to convey respect to a person, even when you're in conflict with them. And you're smiling and smirking now. Did I say something goofy?
No.
But what I'm wondering is if we should just let it make a couple general comments, and then our next podcast we can do the disarming technique. I don't know, how many minutes have we been here?
Well, we're 30 minutes into this podcast.
Yeah, so we can kind of wrap up, and then next week we'll dive right into the disarming technique.
We whet people's appetite.
Yeah. Let's see, are there any other overview points before we say goodbye for this podcast number 1, Helen? And we're going to have Helen with us next week, too. And the way I know that is because we're going to record it in about 1 minute from now.
I have a couple other general overview thoughts.
Go for it.
One is that you have to use all of these things in a genuine manner, because people can tell very quickly if you're just sort of using some technique on them in a non-genuine kind of way, in a fake way, or in a manipulative kind of way. So in fact, I think in order to use the 5 secrets effectively, you have to have an internal switch first, that you decide, I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to see the other person's point of view. Yeah. I want to make an emotional connection. Yes. And then you can use all of these from your heart rather than from a gimmicky or manipulative point of view.
I give you about 3,000% agreement with that. Those are wise words. Before we close off, I want to just thank you for joining us today, Helen. And from my point of view, you've added tremendously to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.